You know the image. Endless columns of German tanks, unstoppable panzers, just slicing through enemy lines. And overhead, you've got the terrifying scream of Stuka dive bombers. This is Blitzkrieg, right? The lightning war that supposedly brought all of Europe to its Ds in just a few weeks. But what if I told you that the whole idea is basically a myth?
I mean, the popular definition of Blitzkrieg is pretty simple and, let's face it, pretty cool. It's seen as this revolutionary German doctrine that combines tanks, planes, and infantry into one single, overwhelming surprise punch. The goal? A quick knockout blow before the enemy even has time to react. That's the textbook definition we all kind of know.
Okay, but here's where the whole story gets weird. In 1941, Adolf Hitler himself said he'd never use the word, calling it a very silly word. Now that creates a real puzzle, doesn't it? If the guy supposedly in charge of it all just dismissed the term, then what was really going on? What was the actual secret to Germany's incredible early victories? So to figure this out, we're going to peel back the layers of this legend. We'll look at where the idea even came from, what the Germans were actually up to, see how it worked so devastatingly well in France, find out where it completely fell apart, and then finally we'll separate the myth from the cold, hard reality. All right, so let's start with the name itself. Where did this powerful idea of Blitzkrieg even come from? Well, the answer might surprise you. It wasn't dreamed up in some secret meeting of the German high command, that's for sure. The truth is, the term Blitzkrieg was actually made up by Western journalists. They were just trying to find a word to describe the sheer speed of the invasion of Poland in 1939. It was never an official term in the German military. Seriously, German officers didn't use it. They had their own, more traditional name for it. Bewegungskrieg, which just means maneuver warfare. The word Blitzkrieg only got popular inside Germany after that shocking victory in France, when the press needed a buzzword to explain what just happened. And a huge part of this legend was pure psychological warfare. You've probably heard of the infamous sirens on the Stuka dive bombers, those Jericho trumpets. They weren't there to make the plane fly better. They had one job: to create absolute panic and shatter the morale of anyone on the ground. That sound became the soundtrack to the Blitzkrieg myth. So, if Blitzkrieg wasn't some brand new revolutionary doctrine, what were the Germans really doing? Well, they were masterfully combining old, proven military ideas with some powerful, game-changing new technology. See, the real story is one of evolution, not revolution. After World War I, the Treaty of Versailles shrank Germany's army down to almost nothing. This forced their secret general staff, the Truppenamt, to figure out how to fight smarter, not bigger. They pored over the lessons of the Eastern Front, which was all about movement, not the static trenches of the West. This thinking was eventually written down by guys like Hans von Seeckt and really championed by tank visionaries like Heinz Guderian, who was yelling from the rooftops that they needed to group their tanks into powerful, independent divisions. But the real secret weapon, it wasn't a tank or a plane. It was a command philosophy called off-tracks tactic. Basically, instead of giving rigid step-by-step orders, senior commanders just told their junior officers, here's the goal, you figure out the best way to make it happen. This gave them incredible flexibility and let them make decisions on the fly, way faster than their enemies could ever hope to. And this chart just lays out the difference perfectly. On one side, you have Germany, focused on high-speed maneuver, clumping their tanks together, and giving local commanders the freedom to act. On the other side, you have France. Their doctrine was the complete opposite: slow, defensive, centrally controlled, and they spread their tanks out in tiny groups just to help the infantry. It was like they were preparing to fight two completely different wars. So now let's see what happens when you unleash this combination of maneuver warfare, concentrated tanks, and Auftrags tactic on the battlefield. This is the Battle of France, the exact moment the Blitzkrieg legend was truly born. In May of 1940, the Germans did the unthinkable. They sent their main armored punch right through the dense, hilly Ardennes forest, a place the French high command thought was totally impassable for tanks. They didn't even bother attacking the heavily fortified Maginot Line. They just went around it, bursting out into the French rear and making a mad dash for the coast. The speed of this advance was just breathtaking. They reached the English Channel in only 10 days. This single maneuver cut off and trapped the best armies France had, plus the entire British Expeditionary Force. It pinned them against the sea and led to that desperate, legendary evacuation of over 330,000 Allied soldiers from the beaches of Dunkirk. The shock was just profound. The French Prime Minister at the time, Paul Reynaud, he really captured the feeling perfectly. The Allies felt like they were up against something totally new, something unstoppable. And that perception, coming from the defeated side itself, was a huge reason the idea of a revolutionary blitzkrieg got cemented in history. But here's the catch. This supposedly invincible method wasn't a magic wand. It had critical weaknesses, and it depended heavily on having the perfect conditions. Weaknesses that got brutally exposed on the massive, unforgiving Eastern Front. I mean, maneuver warfare kind of requires you to be able to, well, maneuver. On the Eastern Front, the infamous Russian mud in the spring and fall and the deep, deep snow in the winter could stop a whole tank division cold. The fast advances also meant their supply lines were stretched to the absolute breaking point. Plus, a huge country like the Soviet Union could just give up land to buy time and regroup. And maybe most important of all, once Germany lost control of the skies, like they did in Normandy in '44, concentrating your tanks for a big push just became a suicide mission. So now it's time to really pull back the curtain and completely dismantle that popular, high-tech image we all have of the German war machine. The reality was something else entirely. We have this image in our heads of the German army in 1940 as this fully motorized force, right? All trucks and tanks. The truth? Not even close. Only about 10% of the entire army was motorized. The overwhelming majority of its divisions were still marching on foot, with their supplies being pulled by horse-drawn wagons, just like in World War I. And let's talk about those horses for a second. Get this. The German Wehrmacht used 2.7 million horses during World War II. That's nearly double the number they used in the First World War. The German army wasn't some kind of mechanized juggernaut. It was, at its core, a traditional horse-drawn army with a really, really sharp armored tip of the spear. There's also this other myth that goes along with it, the Blitzkrieg economy. The idea that Germany only prepared for short, sharp wars so it wouldn't hurt its civilian economy. Well, the evidence shows the exact opposite. Hitler's rearmament plans were massive, long-term projects. They were aiming to be ready for a total war sometime around 1943 to 1945. The German economy was already under severe strain, and civilian life was being squeezed long before the first shots were even fired. So here's the bottom line. Blitzkrieg was never a real doctrine. It wasn't a master plan cooked up in a lab. It was a catchy label, a buzzword, that got slapped onto what one historian called an avalanche of actions. And these actions were sorted out less by some grand design and more by what just happened to work. It was a success that was packaged up after the fact into a simple, powerful, and, as we've seen, very enduring myth. And all of this leaves us with a pretty important question to think about. The myth of Blitzkrieg has been so powerful that it shaped how we see the Second World War for generations. It really makes you wonder, how many other wartime myths are out there that we just accept as fact? And what other truths are still just waiting to be uncovered?